Hey, welcome to this video. This is Dr. Steve. In this video, I'm going to walk you through from the simplest, most basic abdominal training all the way to the most advanced in the safest way possible. It's going to be a little bit longer video than what you're used to, but I promise you this will be worth its weight in gold in helping you understand how to progress someone's back or lumbar stability and how to train them safely. You see, I see a lot of trainers doing some advanced abdominal exercises without ever knowing, is that client capable of doing that exercise in a safe manner? See, you can't just have your client start doing planks and other abdominal exercises, especially burpees and more dynamic things, without first testing to see, can they control their spine? And what you'll find is that once you test them, you'll figure out that a lot of them cannot, right? So I'm going to walk you through the sequence from what we consider a level 1 in our body readiness ranking system, which is very limited number of joints moving, all the way to a level 5 abdominal workout. So you see the spectrum of how that is progressed, right? So first, whenever you have a new client, you want to start at level 1 and see where they're at. Are they able to control their spine? I'm going to walk you through that process right now. So basically, new client, I'm going to have them on their back. And all you're doing is learning, do they even know how to abdominally brace? Right, so the old recommendations from Pilates instructors and yoga instructors and even physical therapists pre-1985 was basically sucking in your stomach, right? So you hear people drawing this abdominal, it's called the abdominal drawing maneuver, sucking in the stomach. Well, newer research shows that that is not that effective. In fact, abdominal bracing is 7 times better at stabilizing your spine. And what we're really talking about is 7 times better at holding your spine together and holding it still while you're doing things like working out, which is extremely important. Because if you don't have this skill and your clients are working out, what's happening is in the spine there's rubbing, there's friction, and over time that's accelerating the degeneration, the breakdown process of their spine. Not good. So the first thing is just getting to this position. You basically, ask for permission. Of course, you're going to take your fingers and say, let me push into your muscles, your obliques right here. And you want them to suck in, yet bear down, like bearing down. And what you should feel is really every muscle in the core contracts, not just sort of the transverse abdominis, the lower part of your abs, which is an older recommendation. You also want your clients to know that their core, when you say tighten your core, studies have shown your core is basically every muscle between your shoulder and your hip. Right, not just the abs, it's the obliques, the lower back, the lats, the rhomboids, the serratus anterior right here. All those muscles should sort of bear down and brace, right? So they need to know how to brace without tilting their pelvis, without doing like a crunch. And this is the biggest difference. Most clients, when you tell them to tighten their abs, immediately if you look at their pelvis, you're going to see this rounding position. Essentially what they're doing is they're contracting the rectus abdominis, their six-pack muscles, without contracting anything else. And that's not good. They have to learn how to brace and not have any pelvic tilting, no spinal movement. Because that's what you want. When they're working out, you don't want their back to be tilting with every repetition. That is destroying their lower back, right? So first thing, can they brace? Now once they can brace, you want to test. Can they brace and have their body moving and maintain that bracing? So the next step is going to be brace. Make sure you can sort of push on their abs. It's all tight right here, right? Everything's tight. And just have them move their arms, right? You can even, if they're kind of strong, you can put a dumbbell in their hand. And essentially what you're doing is, can they move their arms without letting go of their pelvis and having everything in the trunk moving? Everything should be perfectly still except their arms. And why are we doing this in this position? Think about it. Everything is supported. Like, the only thing they have to think about right now, if I were to move my arms, is my shoulder blade, shoulder joint, and that's it. So we're limiting what's called degrees of freedom, limiting the number of variables their nervous system, their brain has to be thinking about, right? So right now, just shoulder. They just had to brace their core, keep that still, and just move their shoulder. If they can do this, and if they have the bracing down and they can pass this, next it's going to be the hips. Right, so when they move their hips, it's much heavier than the arm. You simply just kind of lift up. Now what you're looking for is typically their pelvis will rotate. I'll exaggerate so you can see, but you need to keep a close eye. And sometimes if you don't have that keen eye of sensing the movement, you can put your fingers on their hip bones right here, the ASIS, the anterior superior iliac spine, right here on their pelvis. And what you're looking for is the finger moving up or down, and it should not be moving up and down. They should have the skill to sort of march on their back and keeping their pelvis perfectly still. And this is something where every millimeter matters. You have to be on top of this technique like a hawk. Because if they're marching and their pelvis is rotating, imagine what it's doing when they're doing more dynamic exercises, right? So the other way to word it is, it's like juggling. Right now, they're just juggling 2 balls. And if they can't control their spine, if their nervous system is not skilled enough to juggle 2 balls, how can you have them do a chop or a standing or a kettlebell swing where there's about 15 to 18 different balls being juggled? They can't, right? So you have to start at this level. So now once they master the march, now you can combine, right? You can have them march and move the opposite arm. What did we just do? We just increased the number of joints moving, so more balls to juggle, and they have to keep their spine stable, right? So this is the next progression, like this. Now once they master that, then you can take the support of their back out. They can go on hands and knees, right? So now their spine is not even supported. It can do anything. So you want to, same thing, neutral spine. Don't let them tuck in. Have them find their neutral spot, which should have a slight arch. You want them to brace, and now in this position, you can move their arms. And what you're looking for is they shouldn't be, tilting like this or twisting their back. There should be no movement. Once they master that, then you want to kick a leg back. Same thing, they should be able to kick a leg back without their spine tilting or moving. Once they have their hips sort of kicking back and the spine stable, then you can combine and do an arm and leg, right? So again, now their spine has to be controlled. You're controlling the shoulder, the hip. They have to be worried about their knee as well, since the knee is extending. Now we're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4 joints are being controlled at the same time, whereas we started with just 1. Again, this is the sequence of understanding movement from how many variables your nervous system has to control, right? So now we're up to 4, whereas we started with 1. And only when they can master something like this, then you can start doing more dynamic things, like on the ground. And again, looking at this sequence and this way of progressing back stability, it's extremely important. Because if they can't do 1 or 2 joints, they definitely can't do more dynamic movements involving more joints, right? So it's a sequence of progressing their skill at how to stabilize their spine. So while that was sort of up to 4 joints, now once they can do that, then you can look at, how can they brace, and simply just looking at, can they squat and keeping all of this braced? And you can palpate, you can push on their, stand behind them, get permission first, of course, grab their core and make sure it's bracing. You would be shocked and surprised at how many of your clients, if you sort of push on some of these muscles, they're not even turning on. They're not. And that's something that needs to be corrected. It's a improper motor pattern, an improper way for their brain to do the movement without inside muscles contracting in the proper pattern, right? So you want to palpate and see, right? So if they're getting this, a basic squat down, then there's a couple ways, couple different directions you can progress this. There's ways where you can use elastic cords, right? Just by holding this cord, what's happening is the resistance is not only vertical, it's also rotation, right? So the band, if I hold it out here, wants to rotate my body. It also wants to tilt my body this way. So you have multiple 3 different directions of resistance just by holding this and squatting. And if by holding this and squatting still, like certain joints are not moving, you're focused about your core, your hip, your knee, your ankle. Now we have about 5 different joints moving. Just by chopping down, you're going to add 2 more joints. There's 7 joints. Every time you add a joint, it's another level of difficulty, another ball to juggle for your nervous system, and it's much harder. Okay, so you always want to look at how many joints are being controlled, and are they skilled enough to control that movement. All right, so you can start with static, you can go to something dynamic, and this will be no different than any other resistance that you're holding. The number of joints would dictate the difficulty from a nervous system perspective. Okay, so, and that was done all in slow speed. Once you increase the high speed, that's another level of difficulty. The speed, if you have acceleration and deceleration, your nervous system has to work much harder to control those motions. And also, if you're looking on standing on something unbalanced like a Busu ball or AirX pad or something unbalanced, that's another level of difficulty. All of those have to be factored in. Can your spine control itself with all those different sequences, right? So you should start from the beginning, test your clients, and see. You will find that many of them do not have the skill to even stabilize with only one joint or two joints moving. And as you're having to do more of these dynamic things, what you'll find is that sometimes you might be frustrated and say, Jane, why can't you just get that technique down? It's because their nervous system is just not skilled enough. It'd be no different than, you've never played baseball, you get up and you have a 90-mile-per-hour fastball thrown at you. No matter how hard you try, it's going to be pretty hard to hit that. You just don't have the skill yet. Same thing with your clients. They just do not have the motor skill to do some of these higher level movements, no matter how hard you try to get their technique down. So the proper approach is to take a step back, to take out some of those balls, less balls to juggle, less joints in motion, and build up the skill from there. And this is extremely important. If you want clients to train and not be injured, and what I mean by not being injured, it doesn't mean that they have to have pain at the moment that they do the exercise. They probably don't. What's happening is inside their spine, and I see this in our clinic when people get hurt all the time, is their spine is rubbing. They don't feel the pain, but it's rubbing. They don't feel the pain that day, that month, that year, but years from now, and it could be months from now, they're going to be like, my back's kind of stiff in the morning. That's the inflammation. That's something that as you're teaching these movements and you're not caring about are they stabilizing your spine and their spine is rubbing, you're literally programming their brain to say, hey, that's okay, my spine will rub. So not only is their spine rubbing while they're doing your workouts, their spine is rubbing when they're picking up their kids, their grocery bags, because that's how they are programmed, right? So it's extremely important to correct that in your movement sequence and understanding this sequence of progression and go from one joint to many joints. That's the way you should look at your training. And in fact, this applies to any body part, any exercise. It's just that the spine is the most common that we see in a clinic where bad things go wrong, and that's where the most injuries occur. So I want you to sort of review this program again, this video. It's extremely important that you have a good understanding of this. If you have any questions, just message me and I'll get back to you.